Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's class on gouache sunflowers, part one. This is a two-part class that will be continued next week. I'm your instructor, Adrienne Hodge, and I'm joining you from my studio in Austin, Texas. Uh, Welcome. I see a lot of familiar faces. We've got a lot of lovely regulars who come to these classes every week for a long time. And also I see a lot of new faces, so welcome. So this is an ongoing series of drawing and painting classes using a variety of materials sold at Michael's and or online on the Michael's website. So if you can't find some of the supplies on our supply list in a store, you can order them online, and they've got, great curbside delivery and all that good stuff at Michael's locations. So yeah, we are going to be tonight we're working on one part of this painting, so we'll see how far we get with that finished product. Tonight we're going to be working on the sketch of this sunflower. So if you are unsure of how to draw this sunflower, then you can definitely put a sketch down first. I am going to be going directly to the watercolor paper when I'm painting. So, and that's how I created this example, which I'll switch over to my tabletop and show you in just a second. But you are welcome to sketch either in your sketchbook first and then put a ground sketch, lay some groundwork down of a sketch and then go over it with your gouache. Or if you want to do what I'm going to do, which is I'm going to do a little practice sketch off to the side in my sketchbook, and then I'm going to create a palette based on the colors that I see in the reference photo that was provided for you. And then I'm just going to go directly to the watercolor paper and paint it just with the gouache. So you've got a couple of different options here. So I'm gonna go ahead and switch. And so yeah, tonight we'll see how far we get with the sketching and creating the palette and maybe beginning to do a little bit of some underpainting with the gouache in the watercolor paper. And then next week we'll finish it up. Okay, so I'm going to switch to my tabletop view and I'll go over supplies here. So we're using the Holbein acrylic gouache, and any gouache will work. You can also use watercolor, you could use acrylic paint, you could use, this is, pretty versatile class here. You could, apply any kind of paint that you have, but gouache is really fun. If you've never used it, it's one of my favorite things to paint with. It is basically an opaque watercolor. So watercolors, very thin and often transparent, and it's hard to, use watercolor. Well, you can use watercolor direct without a whole lot of water, but you're not likely to get this sort of opaque quality to happen. So that's the lovely thing about gouache. It has a very graphic quality since it is so nice and opaque like that, but it can also be watered down and used more like watercolor. So you could easily substitute watercolor for this class. You could also substitute acrylic paint since this is acrylic gouache. It's got some plastic going in it. Or you could even use ink if you had some ink, and that's what I like to use. So here's a few, while I'm on the topic, here's a few of my business cards with some of my paintings that I do with ink from a few years back. And if you're not already following me on the internet, I'm on Facebook, Adrienne Hodge Fine Art. Don't forget to tag your work with Make It With Michael's or Michael's Classes, and follow me on Instagram at Adrienne Hodge Art. So that's my Instagram handle, is what the class is tagged with. And if you follow my link tree, which is listed on my Instagram, you can see all the things that I'm up to. If you're in the Austin area, I've got a lot of in-person classes happening right now. I also am open for private lessons. I've got couple of spots in my private lesson schedule that I could add, although I did just add a couple people, so my schedule has been filling up. Anyway, okay, so back to the supplies we're using. We've got the Holbein acrylic gouache. Tonight we're going to be doing some sketching, so we're going to want some sketching pencils. I've got the Faber-Castell set of 6 here with some sketching pencils. I've got a Faber-Castell eraser. I've got the Canson sketchbook, Canson drawing pad here. Get that under the screen. Okay, and then for paint brushes, I've got the Princeton Elite, Aqua Elite brand here. So I've got a number 1, size 1, I've got a size 6, and I think that's probably all we're really going to need, although we could cover some larger ground with, I've also got this 1/2 inch flat brush here, but I think the majority of what we're doing we can fill in with the 6 and the 1. Okay, and then I've got the Strathmore watercolor sketchbook. Any watercolor paper will do, but it's fun keeping stuff in a sketchbook. I've also got a little clip on the side so that it will lay open flat so that it serves as like a little paperweight there. So that's a tip for you if you've got the actual, the same sketchbook as I do and you're struggling to get it to lay flat. Putting a paper clip on the other end of it will hold it flat on the table for you. Okay, and then you're also going to want some paper towels. I've got a shop towel here, and then you're going to want a water cup. Got my very stained studio cup here, and then a little bit cleaner one. And then some sort of palette. So you could use a plastic palette. You could use some ceramic dishes if you had them. I've got these ceramic palettes, and then I've also got this fun ceramic plate that was gifted to me. So honestly, anything that you don't mind becoming a palette, you don't want to use something that you're gonna eat off of again later. All right, I think that's it for the supplies. And then we got a lot of supplies for this one. It seemed like it was not a supply heavy class, but it really kind of was. And then we have this reference photo, which I'm going to be using on my iPad here, and that was included in the supply list. So any questions about supplies before we start sketching?
Yeah, we have one. Can you mix watercolor and you say gouache?
Yeah, gouache.
Okay.
Yes, you can, although just be aware that if you've got this particular brand of the acrylic gouache, that it's got a little bit of, the acrylic is plastic, so you might notice that it just has a different constitution than your regular watercolors, but you can definitely mix them. I mix it all the time with different stuff. I just wouldn't necessarily like mix them too much on the palette, but definitely like mixing them together in your painting is not going to cause you too much trouble, but you might find that they just, because of the acrylic base in this one, when you mix them together, that they're just going to be very different. So I'm seeing one comment about having trouble with the white gouache, paint. Could you expand on that? What is the no, so that's a good question. Melody just said, is all gouache acrylic? No, it is not. So this particular gouache that we're using tonight is acrylic gouache, but no, you can find other gouache that is not acrylic. This one just happens to have a polymer base to it. I'm happy to answer a question about white gouache if you want to tell me what particular trouble you're having with it. Is it okay if I have, yes, it's okay if you have acrylic paint. Oh, it looks like cheese. Maybe mix it with some water and see how, see what happens. If it's coming out really thick, like cheese, it could be older, weather can really affect our supplies sometimes. So I try not to ever, especially in this Texas heat, lately, don't leave, you know, paint in my car for too long, or, you know, if you're in a cold environment, same thing. Don't, you know, leave your paints in like a garage or something if you don't want them to be affected, because kind of they'll just, you know, it just messes with the constitution of the, you know, the paints. Okay, so I'm going to move on to sketching if there are no other pressing questions about supplies. All right, so this is just basically a preliminary sketch just to help you feel more comfortable with this. We've done several flower fundamental classes, and then, you know, we have not done a drawing sunflower, you know, flower fundamental class. And then I was like, I'm just going to throw this sunflower painting class at them without taking the time to, you know, break it down with one of those flower fundamentals. But we definitely have, you know, we've covered enough of breaking down various types of flowers. And maybe I will come back to a flower that is like a sunflower at some point. But yeah, I kind of threw us in the deep end with this one. So we're just going to sketch it together really quick just to get an idea of it. Then we're going to move on to creating that palette. So we're not going to spend, you know, the full hour on sketching tonight. We're going to try to move on pretty quickly, because preparing, mixing and matching all these colors is going to take us quite some time. And I want to make sure we get through that tonight, if nothing else. So we maybe are going to cover the majority of the painting of the actual sunflower next week, but we're definitely going to sketch it and get all those colors mixed and matched, because this class is really focusing more on the painting aspect and color mixing and matching than it is perfectly rendering. And I think, you know, I left my rendering in this painting a little whimsical, a little more, you know, artist interpretation of a sunflower. So I wouldn't worry too much about, you know, if your sunflower is looking like hyper realistic, or your drawing skills or anything with this one. I really want us to focus more on color mixing and matching, and you know, just getting a feel for painting with the gouache. And yeah, so we're kind of doing a little bit of like an impressionistic, not completely impressionistic, but maybe post-impressionistic version of a flower, of a sunflower here. Okay, so I'm going to use a darker B pencil than what you should use, especially if you plan for your sketch to be the base of your gouache painting. You want to use a nice light pencil. If you've got this particular set that I do, I would use the HB or the B, you know, keep it nice and light so that you can easily erase your lines and cover them up. I mean, the gouache is opaque, so it should cover up your pencil lines, but we are going to do a little bit of shading here just to, you know, notice the contrast in this image. And actually, before I start sketching, let me just pull my other sketch out and have it handy. I just put my paper over and lost it real quick. Give me just a moment. I have that one on hand. So yeah, always like to manage expectations at the beginning of this class, and, you know, just say like your outcome is always going to be, you know, based on where you are in your drawing and painting journey. So, you know, really have fun with everything that you do, and try not to put too, you know, high of expectations on yourself to where, you know, it's like unrealistic expectations for what you're going to complete, especially if you're only working on something for an hour with me today. Okay, so the main idea I wanted to get across in this sketch is noticing how we've got a 3/4 view of this sunflower. We're not looking at it head on, so we're not seeing all of the petals sticking out, you know, in a like if we thought about a clock, we're not seeing, you know, the full face of the clock here. We're seeing a lot of foreshortening on the side of these petals. And at first I was going to have us just dive right in and just paint it without sketching it. And then I thought, no, we need a little bit of a sketch because some people are likely to struggle with this aspect of the 3/4 view of the sunflower and how there is so much foreshortening on these petals. And foreshortening is just anytime there is information missing. So like for instance, my finger is this long, right? But if I point my finger directly at the camera like this, well, now there's a bunch of visual information missing. You know the information is there, but all you can see is the tip of my finger and maybe a tiny bit of the side. So that's foreshortening. And we have a lot of it right here on these petals in this 3/4 view. So rather than drawing a circle for the center of the sunflower, we're going to draw more of an oval shape here to get started. And if you can't see my lines right now, just be patient with me. I will add some value and darken them up as I go. Okay, so, but it's not a full oval because we've got this little guy eclipsing the center of the sunflower. So we have our little butterfly friend here, and there's also some foreshortening with the butterfly because we know the butterfly has 2 wings, but we can really only see one side of the butterfly wings there, and we can see a little bit of like maybe some overlapping of one of the wings, but we're just going to call that all one wing right there. Okay, so on the side of our little oval, we're going to go ahead and just sketch in our soft triangle shape of the butterfly. So we're going to end up with our oval and then our soft triangle shape. And we're just going real general here. So we're not looking for a specific, we're not looking for perfection with this sketch. And this is just to get a general idea of the shapes. Okay, and then we've got little legs coming off of the butterfly. So just taking note of that. And then we've got the antenna right there. But all right, back to the flower though. So we've got that. And if you want to be like even more impressionistic here, this is what I had in my other sketch. So I erased this part since there really isn't there's more of like an absence of an edge right here. And then I put the pattern that I'm seeing on the edge of the butterfly right there, just to take note of like what shapes are jumping out at me and what colors are jumping out at me in a way that makes it you know, just a little more the impression of the shapes and colors that I'm seeing. And then I'm going to go ahead and just add the other shapes on the butterfly so we can be done with the butterfly. So we've got a couple of other shapes right there like that. Okay, so little soft triangle shapes. You know, interpret that butterfly how you wish. Okay. And then you know, using the butterfly as a little bit of a measurement, you know, a point of reference to measure where I need to draw the petals. Now that I've got the butterfly in there, I can take note of where the petals are in relationship to the butterfly. So using the butterfly to help me measure out where the tips of the rest of the sunflower are going. But instead of just going right for the petals, let's do it this way, because I think this will help us with this 3/4 view a little bit more. So I want you to do this nice and light so that you can erase these lines, but let's put a big oval shape around our little oval shape. Okay, and so we're going to end up with something kind of like that. So it almost is a little flat on this side because of the way the petals are so foreshortened right there. And then it gets like really elongated here at the top. They're just putting a little bubble around that just to help us see like how the petals are arranged around there. Okay, and then you can erase that. Hopefully you drew that line nice and light, but so I'm going to erase it because I really don't want it there, and I don't want to have to erase it in between all of the petals. But I just want you to have that sense of like that's how the petals are reaching out in a radius that's not a perfect circle around. It's more of like this, it's more of another oval shape. So I'll just outline that in the photograph again, see how it's like more of another oval shape with and the center of the sunflower is farther to the left side. Okay. So, and if you still have your little ring there, then you can just make the little points of the petals first. We're going to just go around and let the points of the petals hit that little radius line that we created first. And there doesn't have to be the same number of petals or anything, but if you want to kind of eyeball it and get, each one of the petals that you're seeing there represented in just a point. And then also take note of like where there are these interesting spaces happening in between them, like over here on I gotta using that clock reference, I'd say at about 2 o'clock, we've got a nice big gap happening in between those petals there. And maybe again at about between 3 and 4 o'clock, there's an interesting gap happening. And my lines are super light right now, but I will darken them in just a moment, but I'm going to darken them more with the negative space. Okay. So, and then I maybe went a little farther south below the butterfly than what is in the photo, but that's okay. Okay, and then over here on the ones on the left, I left these foreshortened ones for last on purpose because they have a different, they're like a little more flattened out or a little more spread out. So it almost feels like I don't know what else to call that shape, but be like the bottom of a heart shape a little bit there. It's like a little downward turn in a couple of them. Okay, so we've got something like that. Okay, and then rather than drawing the line separating each one of the petals, that's not how I'm reading that. In the sunflower photo, what jumps out to me more than like there's not a hard line in between where the petals overlap each other, but there are some very interesting value shapes which are going to be important when we start to mix and match our colors here, because we don't just have yellow on this sunflower. We've got all of these colors. We've got a little bit of like a mustard orange. We've got a bright orange. We've got the yellow, obviously. We've got kind of an army green. We've got, that's pretty much it for and then maybe like a limey green as well. So those are all the colors that I'm seeing on the sunflower, and maybe that's not showing up in my Zoom reflection of the photo right here, but you have a copy of the photo in the supply list. If you're watching this later on YouTube, you should have a copy of that photograph as well. And if you're not seeing the like green reflected here on the sunflower, I promise you it's there. There's some green, there's some army green, like there's a limey green, there's an army green, there's that mustard orange, and then there's how I read it is a little bit more of a bright orange, although maybe I'm exaggerating the bright orange just a little bit there just for fun. Um, okay, so we're going to sketch in those shapes of those various shadows that we're seeing falling across the petals. And they don't have to be perfect. Remember, we're looking for whimsy here. We're not looking for hyperrealism. And if you are trying to aim for hyperrealism in yours, then mixing and matching these exact colors will definitely help you. And you just, try to get those shapes exactly like you see them if you're really aiming for realism. But I'm just going for something fun and whimsical here. So I'm just getting the essential idea of those value shapes that I'm seeing in between where those petals are overlapping. And that definitely gets us closer to how the petals actually look versus if we were to force a hard line. And that's something, with representational drawing with students, I'm always struggling with is trying to get people to draw shapes and value and light and color more like they're seeing it and not like the imagined idea of it. And we often want to put these hard outlines around things. Like with this sunflower, it may be very tempting to do, this hard line in between all of the petals. But that's not what's visible to us, right? What's visible to us is a lot of yellow overlapping and then these different colors where these soft petals overlap. Okay, and then when it comes to the center of the sunflower, I do want to get a little more technical here because I want us to really get across the idea that this is three-dimensional and rounded here. It's got these sort of contours. It's like not a flat surface, right? So sketching out some like rounded, almost spherical feeling contours could really help you there. And then I'm just going to use the side of my pencil to shade it in. But when we go to add it with the gouache, we're going to use quite a bit of stippling with our paintbrush. So we're going to think about like little circles or little dots of color as we're filling this in, and we're going to do it based on the colors that we're seeing in the center, because it's not just black. It may look black on the zoom, but there's a lot of brown and black and white and maybe like a lighter brown happening there. So we're going to use a variety of colors, but for now we're just going to shade it in our sketch. If this is your groundwork for your if you're doing this on your watercolor paper and this is, kind of your under sketch for your gouache painting, I would not shade it in. I would just leave it blank here. I would do everything I'm doing here with the value, I would do that more off to the side. But if you wanted to like shade in some value on here just to give yourself a sense of what's happening with the light and dark value shapes and just to create like a separation to make the butterfly pop out a little bit, you can do that. Okay, and then the next thing I wanted to sketch, because this is just to prep for what we're doing with the paint, just to give us a little bit more scaffolding here before we dive in without, I'm not going to be sketching on the watercolor paper like I told you. So I want to just take note of the background. So I recently got a new iPhone in the spring, and I've been really I had a much older iPhone. It did not have this portrait setting on it. So I've been taking a lot of photos with the portrait setting and blurring the background. So that's the setting that I used, is I focused on the sunflower and the butterfly. And then I, used that portrait setting. So the whole background is very blurry and we can't see a lot of details. So all these other sunflowers are showing up like just circles. So we're gonna, with our paint, we're gonna just sketch these like orbs of yellow. So I want you to just practice that by sketching some variety of circles, just to, you can definitely concentrate them more in the middle since there's a lot more of them in the middle there, but have some like different sizes. So that'll be really fun. And when we add the gouache, we're going to do that. We're going to use a lot of little yellow circles, circular orb shapes, and we're going to be really playful in the way that we're adding this background. And then for the tree line in the background, since we can't see any details on those trees, we're going to just have the essence of those trees, and we're going to do that with kind of a heart rate monitor, sketchy zigzag line back here that just imitates the impression of what the trees are doing. And again, this is just preparing us for how we're going to be applying the paint in a very fun and loose and playful way. Okay, and then if you want to get a few more bigger shapes, like some of these leaves that are coming into the field of view in this photograph and have a little bit more detail in them, that'll really create depth by having this separation between what's being focused on and what's blurry in the background. So having a separation between the foreground and really the middle ground and the background are all blurred together here. So it's really just what's in the foreground that is in focus, and then the background's all blurry. But before we do that other leaf in the bottom left-hand corner, we should probably draw the stalk of the sunflower here. So it's coming out of those two. So we're just doing a double-sided line here coming down at a diagonal, but keep in mind that this is a three-dimensional cylinder here. So if you want to sketch some little curved horizontal axis lines and some straight vertical axis lines to help you see that that is a cylinder, that could help you, especially when we're adding the paint, because we're going to try to make it look, like it has a weight to it, and it's not just flat. And then these flowers in the foreground, or sorry, these leaves in the foreground, kind of going off the page a little bit here, but we've got a lot of more detail in those, so we can zoom in a little bit more on them. But we're going to keep those very loose with our paint too, so we don't need to worry too much about detail in those unless you just want detail, and in which case our class we had last month with the hydrangeas, I really spent some time on the leaves in that one. Okay, and then yeah, just all those circles will really help us just create some fun background layers, or just the idea of how we're gonna fill that all in. Oh, and then the last thing I wanted us to do was take note of how we're going to push the background back with our paint and bring the foreground forward. And that's going to be by pushing this dark area that's showing up in between the petals, especially in the bottom area of the sunflower petals, and then over here to the right. So everywhere between like 2 o'clock and 7 o'clock. I mean, there's some green and some yellow in there too, but we've got a lot of black shadows showing up in between those petals. And so just taking note of that again in your sketch so that you're prepared for when we dive in with the paint, for how we're going to create some depth right there. Just want to make sure I touch on all of this so that I'm not leaving anyone in the dust when I'm painting it sort of quickly, because we are going to paint it pretty quickly next week when we get to this aspect of it. But I'm going to go ahead and move on to start mixing and matching some of these colors if there are no questions about the sketching aspect here.
No, there's not any questions.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm going to set that aside and we can reference it again while we're painting if we get a little lost at any point. Okay, so you can do this directly on the same page that you plan to paint on, or you can do it on a separate page, obviously. I like to do things on the same page that I plan to paint on because for a couple of reasons. One, well, it's really the same reason. It's really no, there are two reasons. One, because I think it looks cool. I just do. I think that looks cool. I like the way that looks. If you don't like the way it looks, put it on a separate page. But my other reason that I like doing it on the same page is to not put pressure on myself at any point in my painting process. And I especially don't want you to put pressure on yourself for things to be perfect or presentable or frameable or whatever. If they turn out frameable, you can always take it to the wonderful framers at Michaels and they can frame it and crop that out for you. Framers do a lot of magical things like that. So, but when we think of things as a study or as practice, it really just takes the pressure off for us to have some, magical outcome, and we can focus on just the practice itself. Okay, so let's start mixing and matching colors here because we don't have a lot of time, but I think we'll be fine even if we don't finish matching all of the colors next week. We have to continue next week, I mean. Was there a question?
Yeah, it just came in. Do you have to erase the pencil marking before painting, or can you paint over them?
Yeah, so that's what I was saying earlier. I definitely would not put this shading in there. If you put a bunch of heavy shading like I did, I would erase that for sure because it just might mix with your gouache, and especially we're going to be using some really pale yellows and everything right here. And even though this is super opaque, it might mix with it and you might not like the way it looks. So, but if you're using a nice light pencil and you didn't put a lot of value on it, then yeah, you should be able to paint over it, no problem. It's just if you added heavy shading, then you might have some issues. Okay, so we are working with just the primary colors. We've got a little color theory happening here. Although I'm not going to spend a ton of time explaining color theory, I'm just going to tell you exactly how to mix and match these colors. And I feel like I always do this at the beginning of the class with our moderator. I'm like, oh yeah, I think all I'm going to reference is this. And then I get into the class and I'm like, oh, there actually are a couple other classes that would be helpful for color mixing. So particularly we had a class last year on skin tones, on mixing skin tones, and that was a bit of an unofficial color theory class. I probably should revisit color theory just by itself in one of these classes coming up, and I very likely will do that. Just kind of a color theory basics, but that class on mixing skin tones was really great because I talked about how to make brown when making a variety of skin tones. And brown is often the color that we make when we're trying not to make brown. And so in attempting to make brown on purpose, we really had to cover a lot of color theory points in that class. So that could be helpful. But I'm going to show you how to mix and match all of these colors, and I will definitely revisit color theory and like a basic color theory 101 class soon, since I haven't necessarily done that yet. Okay, so go ahead and squeeze out some of each of your primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. And then we'll go ahead and put some white and black in here as well. And you're gonna want a lot of space for mixing. So I showed you I have that big plate. I'm putting this here since it looks pretty, but I'm really gonna be mixing off to the side on this big plate here. In fact, I'm gonna move my sketchbook over to the side. Just have this plate front and center here for us. Okay, and then yeah, I'll just pull this back out to paint our little swatches. It's very important that you have your watercolor paper there or some kind of sketchbook paper to paint a swatch of every color that we mix though, because these colors are going to look so much different on a blank page or just off to the side on page versus how they look on the palette. And that is because of how our eyes just interpret color in a way that can be very deceiving. Okay, so you got your paper towel, you got your water cup, you got your paintbrush, one of your paintbrushes. I'm using my bigger round brush here. All right, let's start simple and let's just make a little swatch.
Adrian,
Oh, yes.
we have a quick questions about mixing the paint first. Since we paint the flower next week, hold on one second. Can we mix today and reactivate next week, or should we wait until next week?
That's a really great question. I'm glad you asked that. So this has come up a lot in my in-person painting classes lately, as if when we match a color, that's the end of it. We'll never have to match it again. You're always gonna have to mix that color up again. You know, it's just kind of the process of painting. So I get that like a lot of people want to cut corners and they want like, I'm gonna mix and I'm gonna match this color and then I'm never gonna have to do it again, right? And it's like, no, like, yeah, you can reconstitute it sometimes. A lot of gouache you can, but unfortunately, this acrylic gouache, since it's got that polymer base in it, you can add water to it, but it's gonna dry and it's gonna be kind of like with acrylic, it's gonna be like acrylic paint where it dries in this like kind of plasticky film that you can peel off later. So you can like reconstitute a big pile, but you're also gonna have that kind of stringy polymer plastic consistency happening. So I wouldn't recommend it. You're definitely gonna have to mix these colors again. So that's just, you know, just a fact of life when it comes to painting. I wish there was some like, I don't know. Actually, I don't wish that because I love mixing and matching colors. And if you don't like mixing and matching colors, then you know, you can paint monochromatic paintings that don't have full color. But it's really something you're just, you know, you're gonna have to mix up the paint again at some point. And yeah, we're gonna have to do it again next week when we get back into this. But knowing how to get that color is what we're doing right now. And the reason why I do this, so first I'm just making a little swatch of yellow. So just the yellow by itself. I got a little bit of water on my paintbrush and then that was it. But I find that there are two things that make people give up on a painting. One is they're having trouble rendering it. They're having trouble, you know, drawing it and sketching it, which is why we took the time to sketch it ahead of time so that we, you know, hopefully don't run into any existential crisis while we're painting and we're having trouble rendering how that part of the flower looks. We can, you know, we have the scaffolding of having already drawn it, and then now we're doing another scaffolding thing like the sketch. We're basically doing sketching for the palette, because another thing that makes people give up on a work of art is that they're having trouble making the colors look right, right? Like if you were to just paint the sunflower with yellow only, you're going to feel like there's something missing because there's quite a bit missing, right? We identified 4 or 5 different shades of green and yellow and orange happening on this yellow sunflower, and about 3 different shades of black and brown and white happening in the center. We've got gray, we've got a little yellow on the butterfly, we've got a couple of different greens on the stalk, we've got a couple of different greens in the background, we've got a couple of different yellows and oranges in the background, we've got black, we've got brown. You know, there's a lot going on. And if we were to, you know, just take a cursory glance at this and say, okay, all I need is green, yellow, brown, black, white, and maybe some gray, then we're missing quite a bit there. And as you're trying to, like, if I said, okay, now mix up an army green next week, and I didn't show you how to mix an army green, you might get really frustrated trying to make an army green happen. Oops. And yeah, so I'm helping us to not run into those dead end roads and where we're like, this is too hard, I just want to give up. So hopefully it's going to make it easier next week and not more challenging that we're breaking this up into 2 parts for you. Okay, so we want to make a green now. So I want to go in the order that I did on this other one. So let's actually make an orange first. Let's look at what's happening in the center of the sunflower. So we're always going to take our lighter color first and make a little separate pile of it. That way we don't turn all of our yellow to orange here. So I've taken some yellow off to the side. And I am very aware of the time. So yeah, we're probably not going to get to match all of these colors before the end of the class here, but we'll get through as many of them as we can, and then we'll continue next week, and then we'll paint as quickly as we can. But I bet we will get pretty far since we're not doing the sketch first. Okay, so we're going to add a little bit of red, and we're going to get some kind of an orange. And I added a little too much red, so mine is a very, very red orange. So I'm going to try that again. I'm going to take some yellow off to the side again. And instead of adding red, I'm just going to add some of this red orange to it because I'm looking for definitely more of a yellow orange here. So more yellow than red. And the orange that I'm seeing in the sunflower is definitely a bit of an exaggeration. So we definitely don't want it to be too reddish orange and overpowering. We want it to be on the yellow side. So we'll paint a little swatch of that very yellow orange. Okay, and then now we want to make sort of a mustard yellow, which is kind of like an orange that's got a little bit of brown to it. Okay, and without going too far into color theory here, which is so hard for me, to make brown, we mix complementary colors, and one set of complementary colors that will get us brown is green and red, but we don't have green yet, so we want to mix our green first. But luckily we need green, so we'll just go ahead and make our green. And then we'll already have that, and then we'll have some brown too, and we can mix them together and get that army green to happen. So I've got a little yellow that I took off to the side here. I'm going to just touch it with my blue, starting with the lighter color first and adding the darker color, and I'm getting a really bright green. Well, guess what? I do need a bright green at some point in this painting. So let's go ahead and paint a swatch of that. But let's put it farther down our line here so we can keep our sunflower colors kind of together. Okay, but I'm looking for mustard, orange, yellow, however you want to interpret mustard as either orange or yellow, which is, it's basically just a brownish yellow. So we need to make a brown happen. So I'm going to take some red. And I'm going to go ahead and mix it with this green right here, since we can easily make that green again. Okay, and I got this very canyony brown to happen, like a canyon reddish brown. That might work to make our yellow a mustard yellow. So let's take some yellow again, separate some yellow, And if I'm going too fast for anybody, there's going to be a YouTube version of this class that you can go back and watch and slow down and see how I'm mixing these colors if I'm going too fast. So I made that brown using red and green. And so I'm going to add a little bit of that brown to my yellow. And there it is. There's my Dijon grape pon yellow. Mustard yellow. So I'll paint a little swatch of that. Okay. And now we want, okay, so I can see where I put the bright green sort of right there in the middle in between the mustard. So we already painted our regular green, or kind of true green down there. So let's try to get this army green to happen. So we've already got that brown to help us. I'm going to take a little yellow again, separate it off to the side here. And then I'm going to take a little bit of blue to turn that green. And I'm going to add some of this canyony brown and see if I get it to be the army green that we're looking for. It might not happen right away. It might take us a few tries. Okay, so I pulled some of my green off to the side so that I could be a little bit slower in how I'm adding the brown to it. Also, definitely don't judge my colors by how they're looking on Zoom. I know that's so hard to say in a Zoom class, but you know, I'm telling you the way that I'm mixing them, and I promise you this is looking like an army green to me. But when I look at the Zoom right now, I feel like that just looks like a dark green, which I guess army green is just a dark green. But yeah, so I used that brown, which I made using red and green, and then I added that that brown to my green using yellow and blue, and I got the army green to happen. And I'll just go ahead and tell you a couple other ways to get brown if you're struggling to make brown happen. It's all of your, so every primary has an opposite secondary color on the color wheel. And if you want to write these down, they are, so red is our primary, and the secondary color that is opposite it on the color wheel is green. Violet is, yellow is a primary, and the color that is opposite it, the secondary color that's opposite it on the color wheel is violet. Blue is our third primary, and the secondary color that is opposite to it on the color wheel is orange. So think sports teams. You know, like the Miami Dolphins are orange and blue, right? I think they are. I'm not a big sports person, but that's a reference I like to use a lot is that one. I think that's correct. And then, you know, red and green, we use those around the holiday time. Those colors don't necessarily look good together. They're highly contrasting. So they're complementary in that they are opposite of each other on the color wheel. So all of those colors, when we mix those together, those sets of complementaries are going to get us some kind of brown. And that's what I went into in very detail in that skin tone class, in making all the variety of browns. So you can definitely check that out if you're confused or I just went too fast about making brown here. But we can go ahead and like make a violet here and then mix that with our yellow, and we should get some kind of a brown to happen. So first, let me make a little violet. And then I'm gonna mix that with my yellow, and yep, I got a brown to happen, right? Okay, so if you want to try it that way and then mix that with your green to get your army green to happen, that could help. Or we can make orange and then add blue to it. Oops, started making green on accident. So I'll add some red to make that an orange. I actually already had orange, I didn't need to do that. And then add some blue to that. Okay, and what happens sometimes when you're trying to make brown is you make some other color. So like this is looking very dark green to me. So then I would just add the color that is the complement to that, which is red, to try to balance it out, to neutralize it. And then if that ends up making it look purple, like it did, then I can add yellow. I can just keep going around until I eventually get brown to happen again. But anyway, that's what I'm doing to get these, you know, army green to happen, is I'm adding brown to the green. Okay, let's see, how are we doing on time? Oh, we are almost out of time now. All right, so I'm gonna save the rest of these colors for next time. Oh, was there a question?
Yeah. So Teresa asks, why not just buy the colors? Is there a reason you prefer mixing?
I love that question, Teresa. I don't know about you, but I am not a millionaire. And if I were to go out and buy a tube of, well, for one, they do make gouache in a huge variety of colors, but if you're wanting some quality gouache, this is a very nice quality paint we're using today. And if you purchase this exact brand, you saw that, you know, maybe wasn't the cheapest set of 5 primary color mixing sets that you've bought. So if you were to buy, you know, this particular brand or this level of paint in every color, that's going to cost you quite a bit of money. And I had somebody ask me that in an in-person painting class, and that was my answer was, well, if you've got that kind of money, by all means, go out and do it. You know, it's definitely nice to have a tube of, you know, of all these different shades of green. That's very helpful, you know, when you're painting, to just squeeze it right out of the tube. But a person who's painting that way maybe doesn't have the knowledge of, you know, what's happening when they're mixing that army green out of the tube with something else on their palette, and then some sort of reaction happens and they're like, I don't know what's happening when I'm mixing these colors together. So understanding what happens when you mix colors is extremely beneficial to you in your painting practice, so that you can control what's happening. And then, you know, if you're just so much of a beginner, which I see your comment that it's like, this is, I promise you, like it, just take it slow. I know I went a little fast there, but all we did was make brown. We made brown 3 different ways. So we used, let's repeat it in the chat. Y'all tell me, what colors did I use to make brown? What were those complementary colors? Tell me again in the chat, so I know who was taking notes. Okay, red and green. Thank you, Colleen. What else did we use to make brown? Yellow and purple. Okay. And then one more. Yep, blue and orange. Okay, so we have our primary colors right here. Each of our primary colors, mix 2 of them mixed together and make a secondary color. So these 2, red and yellow, mix together and they make orange. When we mix red and blue together, we get violet. When we mix yellow and blue together, we get green. So now we've got our 3 secondaries. Each one of those secondaries is going to be opposite to the primary on the color wheel. And then the rest of the color wheel is going to finish out with your intermediate or tertiary colors. So your yellow, green, your blue, green, your red, orange, your yellow, orange, etc. You know, if you go into Home Depot and you say, I want a blue green, how many blue greens are they going to show you at Home Depot? That's a lot. There's a lot of blue greens out there. So knowing how to make green and then mix it with blue and get a variety of blue greens to happen is, you know, really helpful to be able to do without having to go buy a tube of that blue green. So, yeah, if I went too fast, you can go check out that skin tones class. It was a free class using Artist Loft watercolor, and all we did was make brown for the entire class to mix and match different skin tones. And all we're doing here, this is a pretty simple, you know, as far as color palettes go, the most complicated colors that we're making are the ones that we just made, and that's the army green and the mustard yellow. The rest of it is just going to be yellow greens, and then we've got a gray, which is our black and our white. So I promise it's not going to get too much more complicated than what it just did. Next week, hopefully y'all will come back and stick with me as we finish making our palette. We've just got a few more colors to go, and then we'll start painting, and it's just going to paint itself, y'all, because we did all the hard work. Now we know how to sketch it. Now we know how to match all those colors. And then we're just gonna layer our colors together and imitate those shapes with our paintbrush and make it come together. And I love painting with this process because it takes the guesswork out of it and it keeps you from running into dead ends when you're painting. Okay, so but before we go, do we have at least a minute here? We went a little over time. Does anybody want to hold up their notes and just show me real quick your colors that you mixed? And Chanel can spotlight you and we can see some of your colors that you were mixing, or maybe your sketch. Let me see some of those mustard greens, mustard yellows and greens. Very nice, Sarah. Oh, and you already got started painting that leaf. Very nice. All right. Oh, I love that plate you're using for a palette. Yeah, I see a really nice brown mixing with that green to make that army green happen there. Lovely. Oh, wow. Look at, I love that you're painting a swatch for every different type of blue that you were getting there, Carla. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And there's your sketch. Love it. Ooh, look at that fun exploration that's happening there. And look at all those fun color swatches. Yeah, look at that mustard brownish yellow you got. That's wonderful. Okay, I guess we'll go ahead and stop there. I don't want us to go too far over time. Oh, I love that you were painting a swatch for every color that you were getting. That's gorgeous. I love to see that. Yes. Yeah, make a swatch for every color that you make and then take notes on how you got that color and you'll build your knowledge really quickly. All right, thank you all so much. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Hope see you all next week for part 2. Thank you and good night.